Hey, this is Frank Martin, writer of Grimspace, the Dark Destiny series, Modern Testament, and The Fourth Wallflower, and you are listening to the Oblivion Bar podcast.
Welcome to the Oblivion Bar podcast with your host, Chris Hacker and Aaron Knowles.
Welcome to the Oblivion Bar podcast, a very special, very special bonus episode for your listening pleasure. I am one half of the hosting team for the Oblivion Bar. I am Aaron Knowles, and joining me for a very special interview today is the author of such titles as Grimspace, his upcoming title, The Fourth Wallflower, as well as young adult sci-fi books, the Dark Destiny series, Mountain Sickness, Ordinary Monsters, Oscawana, Shattered, the Modern Testament comic series, and just a whole hell of a lot more.
Keep going, it will take up the whole show.
It will. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Frank Martin onto the Oblivion Bar podcast.
Thank you for having me on, Aaron. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. We've been trying to make this happen for a while. I appreciate you finally, coming on the show. It is a great time for you to come on because you got a really fun, really cool project coming up that we're going to talk about in just a few moments. But again, thank you for taking a break from what seems to be like just a constant stream of creativity that is coming from you. So thank you for being here.
Oh, I appreciate it. I made my wife go pick up my son from after school so that I could do this. So we all have to juggle all these balls at once, but yes. I wanted to make it happen.
That is your cross to bear. Sometimes you got to pick up the kids. Sometimes you got to do the interview, right?
Yeah. This is daddy's time now. Go deal with them youngsters.
Get out of here. So let's start with, with you getting into comics. Cause I want to talk about you as this creator because I'm going back in your backlog and you have just an immense library, an immense catalog that you've done from, and it's I love the variety that's there, but we're gonna talk about that. Your career feels like an like you began your career with an untraditional project. You wrote and produced a comic anthology series called Modern Testament. Is that kind of a normal breakout for a comic creator?
A little bit. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that the best way to kind of learn how to create and write comics is to start small. You don't want to do your big 6-issue magnum opus right out of the gate. You start with short stories. And if you take a comic writing class, that's what they teach. They don't teach a one-shot right out of the gate. They want you self-contained, 10 pages, 5 pages. And the very first story for Modern Testament was from one of those classes. It was about an depressed angel at a bar taking shots, trying to confess all this stuff to the bartender, classic scene. But you can't do anything with the short. So Modern Testament kind of was born out of this necessity. I need to make a comic. I have one short. Let me just keep this theme going of angels, demons, and just make more shorts in that vein. And this anthology series was kind of born from that. And I've known other creators that do that too. Same thing. They start with a little collection of short stories that they've written, testing the waters, experimenting, learning the fundamentals, and you go from there.
You have, so the Modern Testament, as I was looking over it has this, again, it's, you do a lot with sci-fi, a lot with fantasy, you seem to kind of, gravitate towards those. Modern Testament, being at the beginning of your career feels very, it's almost biblical, but also fantastic. How did that kind of come about and where did you pull those stories from?
So the basic concept with Modern Testament was take classic, I call it biblical mythology. I'm treating it the same as ancient Egyptian mythology and Greek mythology. And I wanted to give each of these beings, these characters, a time to shine. So each story will focus on the behemoth or Leviathan or the Nephilim. And I did one on Islamic, the jinn, and Jewish folklore, a golem. And so I each took one of these characters and I kind of placed it. How would they fit in our modern world? And that was the basic question I asked. And it was a lot of fun in that each short story was considered, it's like its own project. You know, if somebody does a 3-issue miniseries, that's a long project. You're married to it for a while. But doing all of these different shorts, I bounced around different artists, different themes. Some were darker, some were funnier. It felt like, even though they were all encompassed by the same series, I was starting fresh every time I started something new. So it was fun.
It was. And as a reader, it's really fun because, I'm a huge fan. Obviously, we cover a lot of television series on the Oblivion Bar. But one of my favorites, I love shows like Supernatural. I love shows like Grimm. The shows that, even as a kid, Are You Afraid of the Dark? They're in their spiritual anthologies, but in some shows they have obviously the same characters that are reprising their roles, but then again, like Are You Afraid of the Dark, or again, those scary stories, those were ones where they were anthology series, but they didn't just take from one set of mythology. And that's why I really liked Modern Testament, because it was just, again, like you said, there was some Judaism. There was, you did the Noah, you did the modern telling of the flood in modern day. So I thought that was a really cool, again, entrance into the comic scene.
I had fun doing that. And now when I try to dive back into Modern Testament, I do what I call modern crossovers, where I take biblical beings, but I work with other indie creators and do kind of a crossover with their character facing off against the biblical beings. So I'm trying to keep it alive, but expand it. And I think a series that embodies that idea even more is Grimspace, the one that you had mentioned earlier, because same thing, adapting fairy tales, things that we're all familiar with, that we know, but each project is its own thing. And like you said, with like Are You Afraid of the Dark, you have some crossover with characters. Unlike Modern Testament, where all the stories are standalone, they're separate, Grimspace, I'm actually interconnecting them. So it's cool to have these standalone stories, these isolated things that adapt these familiar and popular fairy tales, while at the same time weaving them together into a shared narrative. It's cool. I mean, I like it as the guy creating it, so I hope the other people like it when they read it.
Absolutely. And when just for the listeners out there, when he's talking about some of his issues from Grimspace, we're talking about one specifically that's called like Jack and the Nav Unit, which is kind of like a spacefaring Jack and the Beanstalk, and then you have a robot that is named P1 Nokio, which if you look at it correctly, it looks like it is Pinocchio. So it's again, these are super. I'm a huge fan of the amalgamation of different genres and bringing these kind of modern tellings or even like futuristic tellings. So they were just again super fun to look into. But let's get a little bit further. Looking over your career, you seem to have struck a balance between sci-fi and horror in quite a few of your books. Mountain Sickness, Ordinary Monsters, one that I really am I haven't read, but I'm really looking forward to reading, A Weapon's Journey, which I'm just it's so intense.
You know what that was? That was a 13-year-old going through puberty, playing a lot of Metal Gear Solid and Halo, and just decided to take every Dragon Ball Z and all this stuff, put it in a blender, and create the greatest story ever told. And I wrote it as a novel, as like a 13, 14-year-old, and it was terrible. And I rewrote it probably 20 times as I grew up, and eventually I rewrote it into something that was kind of good enough to be published. So it's this kind of action-packed, adrenaline-fueled thing that I came up with as a kid that I'm glad that I polished it enough that it is now a real book.
That's awesome, because I think that's what we all need as a young reader. We need those books. I was that kid also. I was the kid who was looking for the next great adventure, the next great planet-sized battle, thinking about like how can I sell my legs to the government and get them replaced with robot legs. I was the kid who had this wild imagination. So I love the fact that you started this journey of some of these stories as that 13-year-old, and it evolved into who and where you are now. A lot of writers are like this. We never waste anything, and we have folders of scrapped stories that we will never put in the trash bin and delete. We'll just put them in another folder for just some other time. And yeah, it was something that I was like, I'm
gonna write the greatest science fiction novel ever, and it wasn't. But I kept at it, and I fine-tuned it into something that I enjoy, and that 14-year-old me would be very proud of.
That's awesome. I love that because, again, I've talked about on the show previously that Chris and we're both creators as well. I myself have probably a notepad in my phone of a good 15 to 20 story ideas that I just have been developing for years, probably a good 6 years. And I just have not sat down, or I'm too afraid to sit down and like write them out. I have those moments where I'm like, I want to. That's the most fun creating, when you don't have to sit down and actually write the thing, but when you start thinking about it and planning it and dealing with the ideas, it's all raw. It's just raw, abstract thoughts that you have, and trying to refine them and come up with something that resembles a good story. And then you're like, this is so much fun. And then you have to actually go write the thing. And you're like, this is not as much fun as it had when I was just pretending to create the story. So yeah, every journey starts with a first step. So go for it. Oh, there you go. That's one of those, not cliches, but that's one of those like philosophical, like
sayings.
The journey of 1,000 steps begins with one or something.
It's true. Sometimes it's hard when you want to make like a graphic novel. You got to write the script. You got to get the art. You got to do the letters and the covers and all that other BS. And then so at some point you can't think. They call it paralysis by analysis, right? You just gotta, You just gotta jump in. You just gotta get started somewhere.
Well, that actually brings me. That's a great segue. Chris says I'm terrible at segues, but that's a great segue into my next question, because when I look at your, again, going back and reviewing your entire catalog, because again, you have such a variety, and it's so amazing to read through and see the creativity that kind of spans all of them. You have a specific style. It feels like you have a specific style when it comes to comics, and then you have like sci-fi. So for comics, I would say it's more sci-fi fantasy, and then for your books, there's a lot of like sci-fi and horror.
If there is a trend or a pattern, I am completely unaware of it. I have writer ADD. I just kind of go wherever my muse takes me. And sometimes there might be kind of a method to the madness, but it's all subconscious. It's not planned at all.
Well, I was going to ask, does that, because if you don't have a plan, that kind of, what's not moot makes my next question moot, but I'm curious if you have like something that draws you more towards putting it in like comic or in like anthology form, or if you have a preference on like, because again, it looks like your library looks like you like writing novels that are sci-fi or horror.
It's not. It just kind of happens that way. You get these ideas, and I get asked that question often. Like, how do you know if an idea is going to be a movie or a book or a comic or what have you? And I'm just like, it's just that feeling, You just that tingling inside that says this is how this story should be told, and you can't teach that. You can't, like, there's no class for analyzing and breaking down a specific story idea and seeing why it would be better in one format or another. Because I'm sure, as you know, as a comic fan who sees tons of adaptations, there's no one-to-one comparison. Once you start down one particular road, you have to make a story for a comic. Once you start writing it as a novel, you have to write it as a novel. And if you adapt it from one to the other, there's a whole bunch of changes that need to be made. So it happens at the birth of the process. This is a story that's going to be better suited for sequential artwork, and you just lean into it and never look back.
Well, as somebody who's done all of these different types, have you started writing a title in one way and it's changed into something else, like how long into it?
No, it's never changed. I've abandoned certain things just because it wasn't coming across the way I wanted. For instance, I had an awesome idea. I was going to do like a Modern Family-ish story for all the Greek gods. Zeus is the dad and Athena's like the rebellious teenager. And I'm like, this is cool. This would be funny. And then at some point when I started writing the first chapter, I'm like, I don't have an actual story here. I just have this idea that I think is cool, and I saved the chapter, I put it aside, I've never revisited it, but it was one of those things that I started writing, and I realized that it was this idea that I was in love with, but I wasn't going anywhere. I felt like I was on a treadmill just running in place.
When you start talking about Zeus and like a modern family, for some reason, like Married with Children pops into my head. Yes, I've heard of it. No, I feel that. Have you played the game? Are you a gamer at all?
I'm a huge gamer.
Okay. Have you played Hades?
I have not played Hades. I think I've heard of it, though.
Yeah, you should play Hades. It's very much dysfunctional family, but with a lot of like humor, some romance. It's a great, and they just released the second one. The sequel just recently came out.
What platform is it on?
All of them. All of them.
I'm an Xbox guy, and so I mean, I wasn't always. I had PlayStation 3 was the last one, but now I'm kind of like they're so expensive to buy, and there's like. I have paid for the Game Pass on Xbox, so it's like I might as well just play all the games I get up for that. But so every time somebody tells me about a game, I have to ask, how can I get it? Can I play it?
Yeah, I'm the same way. But it's like I'm not to go off too much of a tangent. I'm a Steam player. Like I play on my PC, but I also so you can just get just about everything. But anyways, just it's a Greek god, family affair with a lot of stress and familial issues, and that's the only thing I wanted to bring up. This conversation is not sponsored by Hades or Supergiant Games, I swear.
Oh, we could go off on a million tangents and this thing would never get done, but that's...
But I speaking of relationships, I want to talk about your upcoming project. It's soon to be starting. You're going live on Kickstarter July 1st.
That's the plan.
All right. It is a fourth wall breaking meta rom-com.
Let's see if you can describe it, because I wrote it and I don't know how to describe
it. I have in my transcript, I have that save that 5 times fast. Fourth wall breaking meta rom-com. Fourth wall breaking meta rom-com. Without getting too much into the story, I'll let you do that. I don't want to do any spoilers, but you sent me a very advanced reading copy of this, and I am so excited for this. Like, it is absolutely just...
It's fun. I think it's a good word to describe it. It's a fun book.
It is.
So, I have a busy writing schedule. I plan books years in advance. I have a whole bunch of stuff I want to write. And then this idea popped into my head of this character talking to me as I'm creating him. And it felt like he was yelling at me for his story to be told. So I immediately dropped everything I was doing. I went for a run, and I came back, and I just started scripting, which I never do. I never have an idea and just start scripting right away. And the basic idea behind the Fourth Wallflower is that a comic creator creates a character on the page who immediately starts talking to him. He's aware that he's a comic character. And the comic character and the creator build a story for the comic character together as the story unfolds. I guess that's the best way I can describe it, if that makes any sense.
It's a great description.
So it's hard to explain because it eventually turns into a rom-com. He makes another character and he tries to have them hook up. And it's just the relationship between the off-panel creator and the comic character. They have a little banter back and forth, and the comic character he's kind of coming to terms with his place in this story. And it's just, It was a lot of fun to write. It was a lot of fun to kind of journey through the story and try to find what kind of story this is going to be, because I didn't know that when I first started. All I knew was that this is a character who's talking to his creator. What kind of story is it? So it's like Wally, the character, is discovering the story as me, the writer, is also discovering it. So it was very fun.
Yeah, and I love it because you almost like, while you read this, the comic creator is a character in his own story, while he's also like not the narrator. And I'm gonna tell you my thought. My thought was that, like, immediately within 2-3 pages, I was already like emotionally attached to Wally.
He's a tricky guy.
And I love, you know, again, without spoiling anything, you know, there's an attitude there, and I got to ask you, like, where the attitude came from.
Wally, I love Wally. And now as I'm transitioning from production mode to marketing mode, I realize Wally is the voice inside myself who wants to say things, but doesn't want the ramifications of them. So I'm creating marketing things with Wally, certain covers. I'm putting him on advertisements, and he's just saying the quiet part out loud about comics.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
One person described it as Wally's pulling behind the curtain and revealing the man behind the curtain of the comics industry, which is, it's fun to give your voice to a character in such a snarky way. He knows he's a comic character, and he is kind of annoyed by it, you know, that he's being pulled in certain directions. People are, you know, putting him on pages and putting dialogue in his head and all this stuff. So he's one of my most versatile characters. And even though this story is a one shot, I can't imagine that he's going to stay in my toy box for long. You know,
I hope not. Because when when I was thinking about how I was going to phrase some of these questions, I'm just, you know, I started thinking about, you know, we recently had She-Hulk on Disney Plus. We have another Deadpool movie coming out. You know, these are characters that have for a long time have broken the fourth wall, that are talking to the audience. But very rarely, unless it's like, you know, Deadpool kills the Marvel universe, very rarely do you have it to where there's this relationship that's being built between the author and the creation.
Yeah.
I love how you... Yeah, go ahead.
No, finish the thought.
I was gonna say, I love how, like, because you just, like, when you described it, you said it's like, it's very meta, but I would even say it's almost anti-meta, because you don't... Like, that's fourth wall breaking is becoming the meta, and you don't just break the fourth wall in this. Like, it's not like he's just making comments. You're forming this relationship. The relationship is breaking the fourth wall.
I remember when there was a comic when I think the Fantastic Four went to heaven and they kind of met God, who was Jack Kirby, you know?
Yeah.
So, but he was a character in the book. They're meeting their creator, but he's in the book. In this, it's kind of the same thing where Wally's talking to his creator, but the creator is behind the fourth wall. He's not. Mm-hmm. So when Wally's talking, he's not talking to the reader in the same way that Deadpool's talking to the audience. Wally's directly talking to the person who's making the book. They're making it together. So it's a different kind of dynamic. And none of this was intentional. I had an idea in my head and I just kind of ran with it. So I only realized after the fact that, like, things that I was doing, what the ramifications of them were. But it's a fun book. It's hard to describe. It's hard to market, because I can't say, hey, it's a book for rom-com fans, because it's not really a rom-com. That just happens to be a rom-com. It's really a book for people who enjoy comics, you know?
Absolutely.
And the weird thing about that is sometimes you have horror fans who like to read comics, but they're not comic fans, you know? They just like horror, and the fact that they're absorbing it through a comic is kind of coincidental. But some people appreciate comics, they love them, what they can do, what they're capable of, and that's who this book is for. So how do I find that person? I have no idea, but I was going to make it regardless.
Yeah. I again, without spoiling too much, I love this. I already love this book. I had, again, there is this emotional journey that you go on with Wally, and I feel like the emotional journey is also with the author as well, who again is behind the fourth wall, and it just takes this emotional journey that you don't know you don't know it's going to hit you until it hits you. And it really does hit hard, and I feel like this is going to be a rom-com book for anybody that feels like they wish they could change their own, like, situation or kind of, you know, they're not happy with the hand that they're dealt, but we're not all empowered to change it. But what if we could speak to the powers that be and have them just give us a chance, you know?
True. That's kind of what it's about, is that Wally, this was this thing I struggled with. I knew I wanted a story. I knew how I was going to start. We were going to create it together. But what's the theme here? You know, what's Wally's struggle? He needs a challenge. And the challenge is, he's a comic character. That's his challenge, is that somebody else is writing his story. And we often think about that in ourselves, in that, are we really in control of our own destiny? Are we really writing our own story? And Wally is the only person who definitively knows that he is not writing his own story. So see him struggle against that is awesome. And it's a little hard to do, because Wally's having a dialogue with his creator, but the creator never talks back. You can't. Yeah. You can't, like, so it's weird. Just like you say, they have this weird relationship, but it's kind of one-sided. I mean, the creator does talk in a way. He talks through the unfolding of the story. So it's just cool. It's a lot of fun. I think it's pretentious to call my own comics cool and fun, but
I think back to Neverending Story.
Yeah.
And the first one, okay, when Bastion is in the attic of the school, and he's like screaming at the book and just wanting things to be different than what's going on, because you're like why is this happening to this character? You know, I've almost felt like that emotional cry while I was reading it. So again, I am appreciative I got to read this. I'm going to tell people right now. You know, you may go back to Frank Martin's catalog and you may think, what the hell is this guy doing writing romantic comedies with everything else that he has in his in his catalog? But take it from me, Aaron Knowles, the Oblivion Bar co-host, right now, that this is one you want to support and you want to pick up. So saying that, Frank, tell us about the Kickstarter, like the decision to crowdfund it, and you know why it's so important for you to get this story out there.
So, when I make Kickstarters, there's two kinds of Kickstarters. Those I know are going to do relatively well, and those I'm not sure at all are going to do relatively well. This falls into the latter category because it's so weird. You know, everybody knows the type of books that do well on Kickstarter. This is not that, but I write books because I feel compelled to tell them. And Wally was screaming in my head to have a story be told. And if you are interested in comics, if you like the medium, if you want to see it toyed with, and if you're just a fan of storytelling in general and the idea of creating characters and plots and settings, check it out. I think there's a lot here for those who get in the weeds of the creative process to enjoy and appreciate.
Yeah, that's one thing I actually I text Chris as soon as I was done reading it. And I was like, and you bring up a really good point. I think that this is going to be a book that people who are wanting to also, and it sounds like a weird way to sell it, but for people who want to get into writing or creating comics, this one feels like also a very good like view of the process, you know, of kind of like developing the story and developing that story with that character. So I love that actually you let me kind of, you brought that up in my brain, because I think that people should look at this one if they're interested, because there's development of the character and how anyways, spoilers. I don't want to spoil anything. It's great. Okay?
Well, you know what? I'm going to shoot myself in the foot here in that even though those creative people would love it and really get into it, there's a kind of an empty space for people who aren't creatives, who don't have that passion for storytelling. So my wife doesn't read everything I write. She loves watching movies and stuff. You know what? She's read enough. A couple books. I deal with that. But I said, babe.
She supports and tolerates, right?
Tolerates, yes. She goes and picks up my kids while I'm doing podcasts. So I said to her, babe, this is the greatest thing I ever wrote. You got to read it. I'm super proud of it. She wrote it and she looked at me and goes, that was cute. And I go, really? She goes, I didn't get it. I was like, okay, just take your knife out of my back. But I understand that, you know, because it's so weird. It's so it's so hard to describe that unless you have a creative brain that works in that fashion. There's so many little tidbits in here that you're just not going to get them or appreciate them or understand them. So she liked it. She thought it was entertaining and cute, but all the nuance just went over her head, which is fine. So
that's understandable.
So
I know what you're feeling though, because like I do the same thing when I write stuff, because I write art. I'm a journalist, so I also write stories and news articles, things like that. And sometimes I'll write something and show it to my wife, and she'll be like, "That was good."
Yes, that's fine.
And I'm just like, "Oh, you're killing me."
But you know what? I wrote a novella that I was very happy with, and she read the whole thing in one sitting. So you know what? I'll take it where I can get it.
Exactly. Okay, so what let me start over with that one. With the Kickstarter, what can supporters expect to see when they support this book?
So I got a standard cover. My campaigns are pretty streamlined. I'm gonna have a standard cover, 2 variant covers. One cover I'm a little, I don't want to say nervous or hesitant about, but it's a cover of Wally on the cover commenting about variant covers. It's just him stating his opinion on what variant covers are. And that one, I'm not sure how it's going to go over. I've presented it to a bunch of people to get their opinions on it. Half of them say it's hilarious. The other half say that it's going to go over people's heads, but we shall see. I think that's kind of what this project is. You're taking chances on a lot of this meta stuff and seeing whether it hits. And if it doesn't, at the end of the day, I could just blame Wally because it's all coming out of his mouth, which is good. But yeah, so I got those 2 covers available. Then I have a bundle, and of course, one of the great things about having a huge backlog is I throw them on there as add-ons.
Awesome. Well, Frank, thank you so much for being here. Again, I appreciate you coming on and discussing all things Frank Martin, all things The Fourth Wallflower, which again, if you guys did not hear, it's called The Fourth Wallflower. It's going to be going live on Kickstarter July 1st. And I'm telling everyone out there, again, believe me, you'll want to support this. It is really good. It's really heartfelt. There's an emotional twist in it. Like I can't talk highly enough about this book because I've read it a couple days ago, and I'm already just still thinking about this book. So the way the story develops and crashes into your heart, you're going to know what I mean by that as soon as you get to that final panel. Trust me. With that, I want to pass the baton to you, Frank, one more time. Is there anything that you want to plug, any socials, anything else that you want to highlight before we let you go?
No, the best place to stalk me is frankthewriter.com. You can check out all my stuff there. I got tons of free stories. Sign up for my mailing list. And enjoy your day.
Again, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me on.